Guardians of Justice will save you.
So recently, Netflix released a superhero show called The Guardians of Justice. Unlike most of the superhero shows that were released within the last year, I've seen little to no hype for this show. In fact, the only reason I ended up watching this show is because I randomly found it when I was scrolling through Netflix's coming soon category one night, and Netflix reminded me that it came out. Honestly, not remembering that this show was a thing or coming out soon was arguably for the better, because this show was not good. If this is your first time ever hearing of the Guardians of Justice, firstly, I don't blame you, but let me catch you up on the premise of this show. The Guardians of Justice is a low-effort superhero comedy / parody show that tries way too hard to parody the superhero genre. Yeah, if you let out a sigh just listening to that sentence, I'm tired too. The whole idea of this show is basically, let's take some of DC's most iconic superhero characters, right? Then let's give them the most unoriginal, low-effort names possible, because we need to make it obvious that this is a parody and we're blatantly mocking characters that people love and care about. On top of that, let's come up with a good storyline for our Superman-like character and then pretty much go nowhere good with it, because you know, we have to get people interested in our show within the first episode. Finally, let's over-rely on legitimately good visual effects or animated scenes that more often than not feel like they're out of context and totally confuse the viewer to the point where they forgot how they even ended up where they are in whatever episode they're watching. Yeah, that's the experience of watching The Guardians of Justice. Just to emphasize how low effort this parody of these iconic superhero characters is, let's break down the roster of superheroes in this show. There's Nighthawk, who's Batman, The Speed, who's The Flash, Golden Goddess, who's Wonder Woman, Awesome Man with no E, who's Shazam, Blue Scream, who's Black Canary, Black Bull, who's Green Arrow, King Tsunami, who's Aquaman, and finally, Marvelous Man, who's Superman. Yeah, not exactly creative or all that original. Beyond the fact that this show is pretty much low effort in terms of actually trying to do something good with its premise, it's hard to like it after its first few episodes because this show does almost nothing with its superheroes. The Guardians of Justice's story is that Marvelous Man kills himself in the first episode and Nighthawk obsesses over trying to find out who or what killed Marvelous Man. The show then primarily focuses on Nighthawk as he interrogates other characters and tries to get to the bottom of this mystery, since he doesn't believe that Marvelous Man voluntarily killed himself. When I say this show primarily focuses on Nighthawk, I mean this show doesn't give an ounce of screen time to almost any other character. They pretty much show up once or twice when the show needs a new story beat to advance the plot, and that's it. That's also another problem I have with this show, because when these other superheroes pop up, they constantly mention that we're the Guardians and that they're a team or a family, but that's not the case at all. This show mostly feels like Nighthawk, the story of Marvelous Man's fall from grace, or something along those lines, more than the Guardians of Justice. These characters don't feel like a team, feel like family, or even feel like friends because they barely get any character development at all in this show. It's incredibly frustrating. Anyway, as I was saying, Nighthawk then begins to lose his moral compass and finally becomes a villain. Wait, does that sound familiar to anyone else?
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah, this show basically takes this line from The Dark Knight seriously and tries to use it as the heart of its story, which doesn't work because The Guardians of Justice is nowhere near as good as The Dark Knight. By the way, if you haven't, here's a shameless plug to let you know that you should check out my Dark Knight trilogy review video. I promise it's actually worth your time, unlike The Guardians of Justice. Now, I want to emphasize that I know that I'm not supposed to take the Guardians of Justice seriously since it's a parody and a comedic take on superhero media, but it's trying so hard that it almost unintentionally makes you want to take it as a serious product. That's the show's biggest flaw. There's so much effort that is put into specific areas of this show, whether it's visual effects, animated scenes, or action scenes, that I almost wish this was a serious show instead. That's the most frustrating aspect for me as you continue to binge the Guardians of Justice, which is a relatively short show. You rapidly realize that it's trying to bite off more than it can chew. The show tries to balance both being semi-serious while throwing legitimately good comedic bits all over the place at the beginning of the show, while the latter half of the show is mostly overly serious while obnoxiously and forcefully trying to throw in comedic parts that don't feel earned. It almost feels like the show loses itself along the way because it falls into the trap of the comedy is clearly working in the beginning of the show, so let's forcefully ramp it up in each episode, and it doesn't work. Rather than being well executed comedic bits like in the first half of this show, which I did legitimately like, the latter half comedic bits mostly feel like they're just trying to be like, oh yeah, did you forget that this show is a parody and not meant to be taken seriously? Why are you taking this seemingly serious story, which is not meant to be taken seriously? Because of this, I rapidly began to no longer care about the outcome of this show. I even began to ask myself, why do I care about this show? Or why am I invested in this storyline if it's not going anywhere positive since it's all one big joke anyway? Which is mostly because when the show is being serious, that's unironically when it's the most interesting and when the show is at its best. That's when it managed to keep my attention. That's when I wanted to know more about where this storyline about Marvelous Man's death is going. That's when the lesser important characters would get screen time. The interesting, serious moments that this show wants you to not actually take seriously at the same time. If that sounds confusing, it's because this show is trying to balance being two totally and tonally different things at the same time when it shouldn't. That's the brutal truth about the Guardians of Justice. This show would have been better off as a serious, original superhero show, not a comedy/parody show that is trying to balance both making fun of iconic superheroes or concepts in superhero universes that most of us are familiar with, and trying to tell an incredibly serious and dark storyline that they don't want you to actually take seriously as well. That's not to say that there aren't likable ideas, concepts, or moments in the Guardians of Justice. For instance, one of my favorite moments and arguably the standout moment of this show is at the end of the first episode. Two very unimportant cops are at a crime scene together, and one cop simply asks, "Hey man, Marvelous Man is dead, right? So you think if we wore his skin we'd be bulletproof?" That question is so dumb, but that's why I love it. It's not only a funny question, but it's a genuinely good question that's delivered hysterically. It's asked the same way I'd ask any of my friends to randomly break a moment of silence, and we end up spending way too much time debating on this topic just for the conversation to end with no actual answer or us simply agreeing to disagree. It's a question that's perfect for a podcast that multiple people would get way too serious about just to end up losing their train of thought and transitioning onto an entirely different topic. It's a stupid question, it's a stupid moment, and I fully acknowledge that, but it was so stupid that it was almost kind of pure at the same time. That's why I loved it. There are also legitimately good questions asked in this show, such as, how can you trust the judgment of a man who puts a little boy in a costume and lets him fight crime? Which is referring to Nighthawk training another side character named Little Wing, who's supposed to essentially be the Guardians of Justice's Robin. At that moment, my immediate reaction was, thank you. It's about time we asked this question because let's be real here, it's a legitimately good question. It's something that most of us admittedly dismiss or choose to ignore when it comes to Batman and Robin's relationship. Bringing up that question is kind of refreshing, and it kind of makes you think, you know what? You actually got a point there. The rare unforced comedic bits, such as the examples I just gave, legitimately do work when they're done in the right context. It's just that this show bombards you with so many comedic bits and so many attempts of purposely jabbing at other superhero universes that you tend to forget about those rare good moments along the way. To give a counter example of a bad comedic bit in the Guardians of Justice, this show likes to bring up the media a lot. In fact, I'm pretty sure this show brings up the news or media in every single episode, but my biggest gripe is that for some reason, Andy Milonakis does the same thing over and over. He repeats the same comedic bit, which is that he's running his own media outlet where he interviews the Guardians of Justice or other characters that play a small role in this show story, and it's just not funny at all. Towards the end of this very short show, I was pretty much begging for them to stop bringing up his bit because they weren't good, funny, interesting, ironic, and most importantly, it just got old incredibly quick. However, there are two things I want to specifically give this show credit for, only so you know this video isn't overly negative. Firstly, the visual effects in this show are really good. It might be overwhelming or way too much depending on the viewer, but for me, I absolutely loved it when it didn't feel forced or overwhelming for me. When a superhero is fighting and literal video game health bars pop up on top of generic bad guys, I couldn't help but like it. When this show would do random boom, pow, or other random visual effects to over dramatize the action scenes in this show, it would genuinely work for me because it actually felt like a live action comic book. This show even has this comedic bit where fatality or brutality would pop up just like you'd see on Mortal Kombat right before someone is killing a person, and I legitimately like that funny yet stupid idea. Is it incredibly absurd? Absolutely, but visual effects like that in this show is arguably one of the only reasons to watch the Guardians of Justice. Secondly, I really loved when this show would cut to actual animated scenes to continue a part of the ongoing story. Was it really random at times? Yes, it absolutely was. Did those moments drag on for way too long and make me rewind to double check what led us to that moment so I could remember the ongoing plot? Yes, they did. However, I kind of felt like outside of the serious moments in the show, the animated sections are the only other times that this show almost strived. Part of that is because this show is so absurd that in an animated realm, it felt way more believable and lively. The idea of trying to balance both being a live action show while also having a lot of animated sections to progress the story is an intriguing concept, but it doesn't work as well as they were probably hoping it would. Admittedly though, I do think this show might have been better if it was just an animated show instead. On the other hand though, there's an idea that I liked until this show actually progressed with it, and that's killing off a Superman-esque character in the very beginning of the show. If you've never watched any of my previous videos, I specifically despise when a movie or show has a Superman-esque character, and that's mostly because more often than not, most shows or movies do the same exact thing with that character. They play the very cliche, our Superman-esque character is gonna play the role of being a good guy only for him to reveal his true inner intentions and reveal that he's actually evil. It's probably my most hated superhero movie or show cliche because it just shows that people don't know what to do with a Superman-esque character. More often than not, it leaves me with the feeling of not necessarily wanting that character in that show or movie to begin with because that plot is readable from a mile away. To give credit to the Guardians of Justice, I love that they killed off Marvelous Man right at the beginning of the show. They ripped off that band-aid and essentially went into an immediately intriguing route, which is doing a murder mystery and telling the story of this Superman-esque character's backstory as the plot advances. The core reason that concept works in this show is that Nighthawk does a lot of detective work and investigation. As he does that, the show feeds us more information about Marvelous Man. Whether it's through conversations, news bits, or simply showing us intense visuals, that idea is far more compelling to me than if Marvelous Man plays a good guy gone bad role. Despite that though, this show takes what is a good idea and just goes on such a questionable route that I hate. It's so bad that I'd argue that the route it goes down is both insulting and problematic because the major plot twists that this show tries to throw at you aren't good at all. Despite that though, this show takes what is a good idea and just goes on such a questionable route that I hate. It's so bad that I argue that the route it goes down is insulting because the major plot twists the show tries to throw at you aren't good at all. It's so incredibly bad that it makes you think, why? You couldn't come up with something 10 times better? You couldn't be more creative? This is the route you chose to go down? I mean, alright, but this really isn't as good as you think it is. Simply put, the Guardians of Justice isn't for everyone at all. Truthfully, I'd say this is for a very specific audience because this show is a very weird, overwhelming, low effort, and obnoxious experience. At times, yes, this show has very good visual effects and has a banging 80s synth soundtrack that admittedly will get your head bobbing. However, despite having those two positive things, this show fails to be good in nearly every other aspect. There are times when the show feels like it lacks any focus. There are times when you wish the show would give time to other characters instead of mostly focusing on Nighthawk. There are times when you wish the show was fully animated rather than blending live action and animated scenes throughout this show. There are times when you wish the show would move on from its repetitive, uninteresting, poorly attempted comedic bits. It's really hard for me to have a positive opinion about this show because it's just not good in comparison to other shows that aim to discuss the superhero genre, such as The Boys or Invincible, both of which are phenomenal shows. Despite having an open mind and a blank slate for expectations, in my genuine opinion, The Guardians of Justice is an awful show that almost no one should bother watching, even if it's out of morbid curiosity. Trust me, as you get further into the show takes what you originally thought were good ideas and runs them into the ground, thus making you hate what you originally liked. It sucks because what I thought was going to be a show that was tailored for someone like me who loves superhero shit, loves the aesthetically pleasing visual effects, loves the soundtrack, and can laugh at completely absurd things, it ended up not being for me at all. This show had the recipe to be something I could have loved. In the end, it failed to be nothing more than a low-effort, visually appealing DC parody. If you're gonna parody a major brand like DC or Marvel, hell, even the entire superhero genre, at least bring something to the table like an actual, genuine, lingering point that you're trying to make that'll shine throughout the plot in a positive way. That way, maybe, just maybe, you could have done this show and the superhero genre as a whole some justice.